We have 2 excellent sessions remaining, and I'm of course biased on this one, but I'm really, really happy to be here. This invite was pretty special to me. I've been invited by Kevin Jones to speak at several events over the last several years. I was never able to make it to the DC Energy Law Symposiums, so this is my first in-person appearance. I love it. I love more than anything being a guest lecturer for the Energy and Environmental Institute and sharing my journey, my corporate journey, and also my legal journey with everybody and showing everybody that the path isn't linear, the squiggly parts are more fun. So to embrace that. So I'm Liz Lucente, I'm JD MSCL 2007. And I am joined by some major rock stars over here in the panels. We've got Joshua Belcher, also 08. We have Emmett Smith. Emmett, what year are you?
17.
17. And David Farnsworth, what year? Graduate? 93? It says it right there. 93. It's right there. 93. Okay. Excellent. No hiding from that. But one thing I'd like to do first, let's, in the spirit of, Lex Orb, let's do the spirit of the law for the community and the world and shout out, who's a student here, first of all? All right, excellent, we have students. Yay. And then also, what's giving you hope today? It could be something really tiny, it could be coffee, it could be, look at all those glasses, look at the challenge over there that awaits us later. What's giving you energy, hope, or inspiration? Go ahead. Anybody? It can be tiny. The glasses over there. Thank you. Thank you. That works. Who else? Who's got something? Especially students. Okay. Jocelyn.
The National Green Bank.
Ooh, there we go. National Green Bank. Okay. Anybody else feeling motivation? Okay. In the back?
Local green banks.
Local green banks. Okay.
Transit in this gridlock.
Yes, and hopefully no delays. Yes. Anybody else?
View out the window.
It's lovely. Yeah, aren't we privileged here? This is lovely. But I would just say my spirit of scholarship and community really came from this institution. So I would say students right now, y'all are inspiring me. And thank you. And that's really why Target wanted to step up and give the sponsorship and the scholarship for Kevin's fund, and make sure that we earn the right to be in the communities where we operate for additionality and emissionality. It's really big. Yep. So what I would say is let's start. Let's start by doing a little bit of the state of the play in the market. I'm going to tell you a little bit about Target, but I really don't want to be the one talking all the time. So I really want these rock stars to give us their insights. For Target, really, we have the mission to help all families discover the joy of everyday life. And for us, that's designing and elevating our sustainable brands, that's innovating to eliminate waste, and accelerating opportunities and equity. And to that extent, what kind of joy do we have when we consume 400 million megawatt hours of electricity every year? That's a lot. Because one REC, we're going to do some definitions, one renewable energy certificate, which is our claim to additionality, is 1 megawatt hour. And so if we have 400 million megawatt hours to offset every year to reach our 100% renewable electricity goal, and then to net zero by 2040, that is a monumental task. And you are right, if all the money could put into infrastructure and transmission build out so that we can actually house all that and generate and harness that good electricity, that would be amazing. But we also have to think about people and planet, the nexus between all of these areas. Biodiversity, the nexus of climate with water, people, human rights, water systems, nature systems, regen ag, all the stuff, materials, where we're mining things. And then you get overwhelmed and you just go to bed. But I'm not doing that today, even though I've been at Climate Week all week. So what I would say is let's talk a little bit about this newly growing system of increased emissions reduction potential, and that is 24/7 renewables. How does it catalyze additional renewable output, clean energy? What's the state of play? What are the barriers? Who's doing this? And how do we get to our goals for co-creating a more equitable tomorrow? So with that, I will stop talking. Though I will say I have my colleague Amanda Clemenson here from the energy team who runs Scope 1 and 2 emissions reporting and does all of our tracking of RECs and accounting and verification. And that alone, just like all the themes we've seen, the diligence required on all of these processes we've been talking about is going through the roof. A question for all of you later, are we going to be all controlled by the big four accounting firms for auditing and verification later? I don't know. But Joshua, you might have an opinion about that. All right, so David, I'm going to start with you for an intro. I would love to hear your role, how long you've been in your role, and what is one of your favorite memories from being at VLS?
I'm a principal at the Regulatory Assistance Project. We're a nonpartisan nonprofit that works on sustainability issues, energy and environmental sustainability issues. A lot of times with utility commissions, but with state energy offices and legislatures, federal government from time to time. We do projects for national labs. I've been at RAP since 2008, and law school was really stressful for me, but she required me to come up with something enjoyable, and there was. I don't know if students recall, but you have to pay, I forgot the fee, but there was a fee that went to supporting clubs, $100 each semester, something like that. And I had a really smart classmate. He said, you realize that all you have to do is write a constitution and have a bake sale, and they'll give you $300, $400, $500, and we can have a keg party. And so I said, that's great. So encourage people to have clubs. There were lots of serious clubs. I don't want to make total fun of it, but there's the Anglers Club. Anyway, we played music. We put together a band, and we played at all these. There were parties and keg parties all the time. They were subsidized by students. Thank you. And so that was probably the best part of law school was Saturday night parties.
Thank you. Okay, Emmett, I'm going to kick it over to you. Emmett, please, Emmett Smith of New York Power and Light. Please give us your role, your operation, what you do, and a good memory from your time at school.
Sure. It's Northern Power and Light is
Sorry. It's my bad.
That's okay. It's a small hydropower company, which I founded actually just after leaving Vermont Law School and built the business model at law school. We do community hydro in Northern New York State. So we do kind of community solar, except for hydro. And we also operate a couple of hydropower plants on a merchant capacity as well. And I'm struggling to think of an appropriate memory. It didn't take place at the Cat House or something like that. Or the pineapples on the Worthy burgers were amazing. But I really have been thinking a lot about Kevin Jones. And I haven't thought about a specific anecdote, but he was incredibly influential to me. And when I was at Vermont Law School, it was really an amazing time because I was also going back and forth to Albany and participating in the Clean Energy Standard proceedings as they were building, what later became the CLCPA and New York State's renewable energy goals, and having Kevin to always come back to and talk through those things, and having his perspective, which was so rich, having worked in Long Island and worked in New York State policy for a long time, and seeing in his face and in his reflections how he thought about this whole regulatory proceeding made me feel qualified and knowledgeable and able to reflect and just sort of understand that this is not some sort of top-down thing that these incredibly wise people have designed perfectly. You can get involved as a smart person that has a little bit of background and, some people to talk to, and you can, make an impact and find your own unique place in that system. So thanks to Kevin.
That's a good one.
Yeah, bravo. All right, Joshua Belcher from Holland and Knight, take it away.
I'm going to go backwards, if that's okay, and maybe start with my connection to VLS and one of my happy memories. I've met multiple, and then tell you a little bit about my day job. So as Liz mentioned, I'm a JD MSEL 08. Really enjoyed my time there. But at VLS or VLGS, I'm actually a professor, adjunct in the summers. I've been very lucky to have been invited on a number of occasions to teach an offshore wind course, accelerated offshore wind course, over the course of a very long and intense weekend each summer for the last few summers. In fact, there are a number of students in the audience, so if the tomatoes start flying, you'll know where they're coming from. But that has been wonderful, and my connection to Kevin, I've got a few. He came after my time, but I actually first met Kevin at an oil and gas conference in Trinidad and Tobago that we were both speaking at. And I think he must have just been new to the faculty. So when I saw that he was from Vermont Law, I went, oh my gosh. And so we immediately started talking, and we had this connection there just randomly in Trinidad and Tobago. And we stayed in touch over the years, and it was in fact Kevin who invited me to first start teaching the offshore wind course at VLS. And for that, I'm super grateful, not only because I enjoy it, but that's one of my happy moments. It's getting to teach this course. And so far, all the classes, all the students have just been super engaging. We talk after classes, just seeing sort of the intensity that they bring to the course and the interest in the space is, it's awesome. It's really awesome. So my day job, I am a clean energy transactions and environmental partner at Holland and Knight. What more can I say other than, all things energy? I'd say my primary clients are drawn from utilities and sponsor IPPs, and then their customers on the other side.
Like needy ones, really needy corporates, Fortune 50
full disclosure,
needy corporates.
Full disclosure targets one of those.
Yeah, we've worked together, and actually really fun VLS connection when I first started at Target, and I'm going into a virtual power purchase agreement negotiation, and learned from my colleagues that our partner's name is Joshua Belcher for outside negotiation. I'm like, really? Excellent. So it's been good. Well, let's go over to David. Regulatory assistant process. You've got a wonderful suite of information that y'all have probably gotten in your inboxes already. You can look at and please pour through them. Find us all afterwards. I'm available. Find me on LinkedIn or however you want to, and I'm happy to keep the conversation rolling. And I'm sure all the panelists are. Sorry in advance. But I've got this magical item for you.
Yep.
I would love it if you could just lay the land. Give us the definitions. What are we talking about? Why do we need this transition? And where is it being done? What are the metrics? Is it just for big tech? Crack open the 24/7 for us when it comes to tariffs. So we do also need to know, because maybe not everybody knows what utility tariffs are. I don't want to assume that people do. So it's not like a tariff like you're in trouble, but David's going to tell us.
Oh, great. Okay, excellent. Well, listen, thanks again. I love the way you kicked this off. So my goal, next 12, 13, 14 minutes, is for you all to have a sense of what a 24/7 clean, carbon-free energy tariff is. And I want you to have a sense of the tensions that result from the idea of adopting a 24/7 carbon-free tariff. And it's a really long name, and I'm adding an additional term to it as we have here, and it's a transitional tariff. I'm going to say transitional a few times, and it's really important to understand. When folks in the office, we first started talking about 24/7, we started to say, well, what about, how can you do that? What about 20 hours, 7 days a week, or about 20 hours, 5 days a week? How do you do this? And the point is, this is a transition, and it's going to take some time time doing it. So let's just push ahead here. So this is me really quickly. I did a dual degree, by the way, at the law school. I forgot what they're called. They always had so many names. Is it an MSCL? MELP? MSCL? I don't recall. Dual degree. Anyway, after that, I went to work. Some of you may know Michael Dworkin. He was the general counsel at the Utility Commission in Vermont. And Vermont, you pass the bar, you have to work for some practitioner for 6 months. I went to work for him, gave me a job, and I was there for about 13 years. And I came to RAP in 2008. Had some interesting jobs at RAP along the way. So let's just talk about why we need 24/7 transition tariffs. And you could probably apply this to the idea of why do we need to think about hourly matching? Because that's basically the crux of a 24/7 tariff. Well, customers and policy demand that almost half the US has these significant energy goals. New tools are needed to address high emitting hours. In the definition, great definition, by the way, for emissionality was plopping an unneeded solar project in a place where there's already a bunch of solar. That's a bad idea, obviously. But when the sun goes down, those shoulder times of the day, what sort of dispatchable resources can we find to fill in those spots? If we're counting by hour, maybe we can start identifying resources and bringing resources to the market that can serve that. Complementary CFE investments, carbon-free energy investments. This isn't just about building new stuff. It's about taking advantage of existing resources. It's about upgrading existing resources and improving upon those. And the idea of a tariff, a carbon-free tariff, is that you're going to build on local competitive advantage. You're going to try to develop things that are near where the energy is being used. My organization, the Regulatory Assistance Project, in 2023, started a process that took us a good part of the year. We brought together utilities, NGOs, government agencies, the national labs, EPRI, all sorts of folks in this world, and about 60 stakeholders. We spent a number of months talking about issues that would go into the development of a tariff. I should have defined tariff. If you've ever been to a French restaurant outside, there's something called a tarif. It's a menu. A tariff is what's on the menu at the utility, okay? Anyway, so we went through this work and had all these folks kick the tires on. A lot of folks who didn't like this idea kicked the tires a lot. They kicked a lot, actually. And we came up with a piece of work that we think is useful in carrying forward this discussion. Here's a list of the folks. Lots of them is the point. But what we did, a shameless touting of we put together a paper with appendices. We put together a summary paper, much shorter, 60 pages, 15 pages. And then there's a webinar that we did. I'll show that slide again. You can count on that. But what we did is put together something that we thought would be useful and to carry forward the discussion. So I really could use the number on these slides. Let's start here. Okay. What's the crux? What's the difference between buying renewables today? First, I should say I apologize. What we've got today are voluntary green tariffs. They've served us really well. They work with RECs. Most folks here understand that. I'll go into that really briefly. They served us really well, but there's a way of improving upon that model, and that is sort of at the bottom of what I'm looking at today here. The existing tariffs use annual tracking and matching of renewable generation with customer load, right? And they've served us really well, like I said. However, annual matching doesn't consider the timing of green energy production. I think that's really important, nor the location, really. As a result, customers will find that in many hours of the day, They could be 100% renewable because I've got the recs to show it. But they could be served by natural gas in the system, in the New England system, natural gas in the NISO system at certain times of the day, despite having those recs on hand. So as a result, customers will need to find that, will find that these hours that they're being served by gas, maybe there's just a better way of approaching this. And so what we've done is develop a tariff that is built upon hourly matching rather than the way RECs work today. I'll use the word certificate instead of renewable certificate. By renewable certificate, I mean the traditional certificate. Most RECs are produced quarterly or annually, and they don't recognize the change in energy use over the course of the day. If people start to adopt an hourly matching structure with this tariff, it's a voluntary approach, of course, but if they start to adopt it, then they're going to be placing value not just on emissions-free resources, but dispatchable emissions-free resources. It may be improving the hydro or the wind we heard about, but in combination with batteries. It may be the use of other resources that can be dispatched without huge effort. And what you're doing is creating value for those resources and bringing them to market instead of doubling up and bringing more and more resources that are already at market and may not be as useful as we think. Sorry, I'm getting really dry mouth here, beg your pardon. In this paper we put together, thank you, we sort of structured it around 5 fundamentals. That is integrating a transition tariff investments with ongoing planning, integrating it with planning, ensuring that the emissions accounting is solid, okay? Because you're not just counting carbon-free emissions, zero emissions resources, you're counting the other megawatt hours that are being served at times of the day that have carbon associated with them. Transition tariffs to accelerate complementary investments, like batteries, for instance, geothermal, employee rate design to ensure fairness, because it's great that you have big corporations leading the way. They're important champions. But what about the rest of us? What about small towns? Are they going to be able to make those investments themselves? And integrating this all into operating systems is going to be really important. Excuse me. So the first sort of focus here, these 5 fundamentals I think are really important because we take the position that if you integrate these, what you're going to do is create a positive cycle where you see the incremental investment here on the right, where you're going to start seeing investment you're going to see investment grow in these sort of hard to serve resources. You're going to see this is sort of a business as usual reduction. You're going to see an increased reduction in emissions as well. We think it's very important that all emissions, that all resources are recognized by this sort of tariff. And this simply just articulates that point. You want to optimize existing resources. Non-utility investment is really important. You don't want the utilities only doing it. Everybody else should be able to participate, and then complement with existing utility and non-utility carbon-free resources. So the recommendation we come up with is implement a transition tariff based on these carbon-free principles that are contained in this paper, and implement a process that is recommended by NARUC. Folks, have you ever heard of NARUC? Okay, NARUC and NASIO, okay, the National Associations for Utility Commissioners and State Energy Offices. They've already articulated the best way to do planning, and we just say follow their approach. Where I'm going to spend most of my time here is talking about emissions, because I think that's really the critical part of this. getting emissions right is really at the heart of this type of tariff. I apologize. I'm having a hard time. I have two monitors here, but neither of them work. That's okay. So I'm just going to turn around and talk to the wall. That's okay, folks. So quite obviously, the simplest approach to this, those of you who are involved in this business today, this is the way things look like. And we're not suggesting really any difference from there. You have a registry. You have generators producing certificates. You have consumers producing those. They'll go to the registry. There'll be appropriate accounts. When people want to take credit for it, they'll acquire those. So there will be a transaction for those RECs. And then there will be retirement at a certain point. And that's the way it works today. And we're really not suggesting that it work any way differently. We're just talking about a different currency. Okay, we're talking about an hourly currency. So developing the capability will help standardize the adoption of a series of emissions tracking procedures we think are really important. And to make this work, what we put together is 5 recommendations. Tell me about time here for a second, because I feel like I'm wandering all over the place. Okay, thank you. So we have, we make 5 recommendations with respect to air emissions. The first one is that utilities should adopt accounting systems. Load serving entities should adopt an hourly approach to counting load. Today, that's possible. It's happening in certain places. But can the customer go to the utility and say, what did I use last night from 7 to 8, from 8 to 9, from 9 to 10? Can they do that in an hourly fashion? We think that the second recommendation, it's very important that any state developing a policy like this, a tariff, that they engage in consequential accounting. That was alluded to earlier on. What would adoption of a tariff do to the grid out there? What if you built a natural gas plant? You wouldn't just plop it out there and flip the switch. Okay, you have to model that to find out what that does to all the other resources out there. And as a subset of that, what does bringing on a tariff like this, let's say there's 1% adoption or there's 20% adoption in that utility service territory, what's that going to do to all the other resources out there? Consequential accounting takes a look at the effects of adopting a policy on the grid at large. But it also is important to look at attributional accounting. Attributional accounting is looking at the emissions associated with the portfolio of generation you put together, the utility, you put together to give to the consumers. I'm just going to make 2 more points. I'm going to cut this short because I'm sure these guys are going to do a much better job than I am. But bear with me 1 more sec here. What our inquiry showed is that it's possible to get sufficiently precise emissions information so you can characterize at an hourly level the emissions associated with the resources that are going to go into a portfolio that serves a customer. And we think it's very important that folks rely on publicly available information. Like I said, a portfolio is not just going to be the green stuff, it's going to be all the other resources, right? US EPA continuous emissions monitoring system data, SEMS data, it's for 25 megawatt resources and larger. That's probably 3/4 of what's out there in lots of places. That's publicly available information, and that is available. That's readily available. There's also calculated generator-specific heat rates that could be used for smaller resources. And our paper sets out a hierarchy of if you can't get that information, then try this information, et cetera. Another standardization proposal that we have is that the markets for this type of service, that they define geographic boundaries. So the resources that get put into the portfolio that serve customers will either be from the balancing area where the load is located or be deliverable to the balancing area. Okay, it's a deliverability requirement. Lots of RPSs have it. It's pretty loose, but the idea is if you want to represent that you're using clean energy, then it's nice to know that it's not coming from across the country. It's not just an arithmetic offset. It's more or less local. The fifth recommendation, we think that it's important that whatever is developed in the way of a tariff, that it's really important to support first movers, but it's also very important to make sure that folks who are not participating in this don't get hurt. Let me give you an example here. Entergy Arkansas is providing the federal government. This is sort of a first step in the 24/7 approach. They're providing the federal government under an MOU, a tariff, so to speak, with carbon-free energy. Entergy Arkansas system is 70% nuke, about 70% nuke. They've hired a tracking system called EMMETT, okay, from the Midwest. EMMETT is tracking existing Entergy Arkansas resources at an hourly setting. But what they've done is make sure that since traditionally customers in Entergy Arkansas only got 70% nukes, they're making sure that under the tariff, they're only going to get 70% nukes. Okay, there are utilities in the US who are saying when a customer comes in and says, we want all your clean stuff, they give away all the clean stuff. Carbon-free stuff, I should say. But remember, ratepayers have paid for that nuclear power plant. Ratepayers have paid for a number of resources that are carbon-free. And all we're saying here is that observe the traditional allocation. And then in this case, let's say Entergy Arkansas has a 70% score. Now you have to go and get the rest of your energy from additional resources, incremental resources. We've talked about the importance of pushing complementary investments. We think that's really important. We all know that there are loads of EVs driving around that people have paid for that have batteries in them, but nobody seems able to coordinate them and to put them, for example, together with some renewables that only work when it's sunny, or only work when it's raining, or only work when it's windy. Okay, so make connections with, make complementary connections. Employing rate design, paper goes into this in a long detail, but the point here is that it's important to design rates in a way that's going to encourage resources, not just carbon-free resources that are existing, but new resources. And integrate that into operating systems. NIST, the National Institute for Standards and Technology, is setting up standards that can be adopted to this. There's an organization in Europe that's been doing this with hydrogen, and their name escapes me right at this moment, but they're also providing standards. And basically, when utilities are starting to develop systems, they don't have to have everything solved all at once. It can go incrementally. So the first step, just like with Entergy Arkansas, track your existing resources, track the load. Can you do it hourly? Can you make those connections? Those sorts of things. I'm going to finish here, and hopefully I'll make as much sense as the rest of the folks here when you continue. Thanks for your attention.
Deep into the thick of this, and it being very much more difficult when you're not in the RPS area, when you really need that balancing authority data, and then there's an EEI-based platform where you can look at renewable grid mix and not have accurate data for 2-year lags. And that's a real problem that I think needs to be fixed, where the data and accountability piece is getting, it's more and more on people's minds. We want to avoid greenwashing. We want to have accuracy. And especially when you're trying to go into a granular hourly based time match, leaders like EMMETT that Dave just shouted out in the Midwest, there's utilities that they partner with that are doing just that are leading the way, and they don't always have to be big IOUs. A lot of them are cooperative or munis. So you can look into that. Minnesota is a great case study. If you want to talk to me about resources to look into that, please do. But let's talk to Joshua, because Joshua is going to make this all make sense to you, because this is going to be where rubber hits the road. What are clients asking you for? Are there clients that are asking you to represent them to look at 24/7 options? Are there tracking systems that can do this besides EMMETT? What does it take? And what are you seeing in the state of play here?
All right. So I assume most everyone in here is an energy nerd, but just in case, I want to zoom out just a little bit before I sort of answer the specific question and provide a little bit of background and history, at least the way sort of I approach it and the way I've come to these markets. So just zooming out. So historically, and recognize I'm coming from a place where I'm working with renewable energy developers and their C&I load and all of that. And really it was a little more than a decade ago when sort of corporates really started focusing their interest on going green and replacing their traditional grid mix with renewable electricity, right? And over the last decade or so, the focus has been on renewable energy credits or guarantees of origin, depending on whether in the US or in the EU. And there are some other names we call renewable energy credits in other markets. But that was the focus, right? And sort of as David said, it's all about annual matching. And so, corporates would, in the C&I space, they would buy their power, they get it off the grid, they figure out what their load profile is. This is how many, megawatt hours a year we consume. This is what we need to match with renewable electricity. Million. They didn't change their purchasing because they had offices, they had stores, they had facilities all over the place, disaggregated load that they would match. And so they would figure out what their load was and they'd say, okay, how many RECs do I need to go buy in the system? And you had a lot of, dealers, broker dealers who would purchase, when the REC system developed, they would purchase RECs and say, well, how many do you need? Okay, here's what you got. And you'd match them on an annual basis or something like that. And that was sort of the main way of going about it. And you've sort of seen, staying in that same world, sort of two different ways of procurement, because you've got the physical electricity, and you've started to see these opportunities, these green tariffs evolve, where different utility offerings would say, hey, we can actually make your grid mix green, right? We can bring in grid, we can bring in more renewables to our grid, and we can figure out how to do that. And so you've seen sort of green tariffs start to evolve, and they're sort of offered fairly widely now, where you can go and purchase, you can sort of designate, you're going to purchase from particular assets even, which is great. But there are some reasons why that's not always optimal, right? There's usually a price premium associated with getting the green energy physically off the grid. And there's a lot less control. You don't have a lot of control. It's where the utility sources it. Hey, we're going to put some solar here, some wind there. We're purchasing from these IPPs. This is what you get, and this is what it's going to cost, right? So you had some limited, you had opportunity to purchase green, but you didn't really have much control. So in parallel, and actually I think somewhat accelerated over green tariffs, we first really saw what we call virtual power purchase agreements. And I won't get too much into the details. It's actually a hedge. You're not purchasing actual physical electrons, but you're doing a financial swap for a fixed for floating. There are lots of different settlement
Contract for
structures.
differences.
Yeah, but at the end of the day, you're doing this financial hedge that provides some stability to an independent power producer, like for an SPV, like a solar farm or a very particular wind farm. And in exchange, you get their renewable energy credits. What was nice about this for corporates, especially ones with disaggregated loads all over the country, and this kind of ties to the geographic point, which we can come back to at a later point. But you can say, look, across the country or across the state, I have this load, but there's no one. I can't just source from all these places. I've got a solar farm or a wind farm, in West Texas or in Nebraska or in Oklahoma that's producing tons and tons of this electricity that's green. And so you would do these VPPAs with those, with those particular assets. And oftentimes before they even were built, so you kind of get this concept of additionality, which again, we can talk to. I kind of like this emissionality though, for reasons we'll talk about when we're talking about CFE, carbon-free energy. So that was kind of the state of play. And I think that's still huge, right? That is still happening. It's very active. It's actually a big part of what I do. And now it's sort of rolling into supply chain. So you have big leaders like Target and others, the Googles and whatnot, now pushing these obligations down to and figuring out ways to facilitate these sorts of renewable energy purchases by their supply chain and everything else. Well, so now though, what's CFE? What's 24/7 CFE? Carbon-free energy. And note, I'm saying carbon-free, not renewable, but carbon-free energy. Why is that important? What's the big deal? Well, there are some studies, and I won't go into them, that suggest that, hey, actually you get much better carbon reductions if you're purchasing renewables or carbon-free electricity on a 24/7 basis for various reasons. It's a couple hundred pages that I have not dug into, but this is the gist, right? You get much better carbon results for decarbonization if you go this route. And that's been picked up. So it's actually appropriate that we're here, Climate Week, New York, the UN is here. You have this UN 24/7 carbon-free energy compact. And I think as of this morning, it was not, when I looked at it, there were 165 signatories to this effort. And this is buyers, this is sellers, this is governments, this is financiers, system operators who have said, yeah, this is a good idea, let's make this happen, we're gonna make this happen. And you've seen commitments from the market, major commitments like Google and Microsoft. We're gonna go 24/7 CFE by 2030. Even the US government has said by 2030, they want 50% of their power to be 24/7 CFE, right? So that's just to kind of position that. That's sort of, been the evolution so far. And here we are trying to figure out, does 24/7 CFE make sense? What do we need to do to make it happen? And so my clients, so like I said, I draw from a number of clients in the space, and I'll focus on sort of the off-takers, the buyers, right? And they're sort of operating couple different spaces. You've got, I refer them to C&I, commercial industrials. I'll say on the commercial side, where we're talking about, traditional businesses, maybe they have large manufacturing facilities or distribution centers or lots of office buildings. They are less focused right now, I think, on 24/7. They're looking at it, but I think the complexities of the process are still sort of, they're trying to figure it out. There are a number of issues with sort of jumping into 24/7 CFE, and so they're a little bit more cautious right now. They're trying to kind of figure it out. On the other side, on the industrials that tend to have larger, and I kind of lump in the Googles and the Amazons, the other big data center, the hyperscalers who are consuming hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of megawatts of capacity. They need it for each data center, and they're doing this globally. They can more effectively pursue 24/7 CFE and demand it. And so that's why you see sort of the front runners being the Google, the Microsoft of the world. They're actually really interested in it, and they're driving it. They're driving it forward. They're getting in there and trying to figure out how can we help shape the green tariffs to do this? How can we work with other providers to create the products? But they really have to kind of muscle it out, because there's, as we kind of talked about, it's nascent. It's not just something you can kind of pick up really easily, and it's not really accessible. And then I have a set of clients, and so they're definitely interested. Then I have a set of clients who are interested in decarbonizing, but they also make products. So they're in the green and blue hydrogen space. They're in the green and blue ammonia space. And they're also looking at, there's an additional level to their calculus. They're very interested in this, But when you're thinking about, I don't know if you're familiar with like the 45V tax credit, right? That's very much based on carbon intensity. And so it matters how you're sourcing the green energy or carbon-free energy for that process. And it really impacts how, what level of subsidization through the tax credit that you're eligible for. And then they're also looking at European standards over in the EU, big markets potentially for things like, clean hydrogen or green ammonia, but they also have standards. And all of these, both in the US and in the EU, slightly different. They need to be harmonized, but they have time matching requirements. So it's not just, hey, match some RECs to your energy profile when you created this hydrogen or ammonia. We want to see that there's some level of time matching that goes with that, and it ramps up over time. So in order for a lot of the production that we see in the US, a lot of our sort of chemical companies that are creating that, to play in those markets overseas, not only are they sort of looking for the money in the US, but they want to export their product, and so it has to be compliant with these, European standards. So 24/7 is coming. I think there are a lot of things to be worked through. Obviously, the recommendations, that David and RAP have put together are important in a lot of different ways, and they need to be brought to bear. It's going to take some time, but I think it's definitely coming.
And for the most part, these are voluntary opportunities for your clients, which is great. There's also what you said, these EU regulatory, CSRDD, all this stuff, all the disclosures coming our way that people do need to be mindful of as they have international operations. Those are, fit to comply earlier than just hyper-local companies. So there's that. And then maybe the utility scale, the data centers, having an aggregated huge load to offset like that with almost like a one and done approach versus a lot of mom and pop shops, maybe I have like state by state different size loads, not big enough to, the juice is not worth the squeeze at this point. So we'll see this steamroll a little bit, and it's going to be interesting to watch. But what I really took from what you said was the analogy that these, and Dave too, that these products are driving further decarbonization and local stability in the way that unbundled REC purchases across North America don't do justice, or maybe are not even emissionality happy. So I would like to turn a little bit more to that local focus. So let's talk to Emmett. Emmett, I want to talk to you about your operations and small hydro, really cool. I want to hear about that. But let's talk a little bit about how you're interacting with state policy. And then there's also this overlay, New York City has its own, and it has its own policies. There's laws that you can tell us about. I know we also have somebody from the climate office here, which is great. But I want to talk to you a little bit about how the REC market has been working for you, and what's your perspective on this?
No one told me someone was going to be here from the mayor's office. There's no nice sort of people here, are there? Hopefully there are, obviously. First of all, that was very dense. You guys are really smart. Thank you very much. I feel smarter now. So independent hydro, we do also sell RECs. I manage some REC sales for independent hydro producers in New York, which has put me in a bunch of spaces I wouldn't be in through community hydro, which is really sort of interesting. And it's a really interesting framework to kind of look at New York State policy and the interaction between policy and the REC market, which is very different here than in most places. It kind of goes back to one of the first things that Kevin Jones and I thought was not the best way of doing it in the Clean Energy Standard back in 2016. New York State, when they declared their 70%, well, at the time it was 50% renewable by 2050 goal, they counted all the renewable energy that was in New York State, most of which was hydro, about a third from the state itself, from NYPA, about a third from Hydro-Quebec, and about a third from independent in-state hydro generators. But what they didn't do was create a program where they would secure the RECs from those facilities. And so some of those RECs were in New York State because they were in NIGATs. Some of them were actually system mix imports from Quebec that they were just counting as renewable based on the system mix in Quebec, even though Hydro-Quebec said, we're not giving you RECs, we're just giving you power. But But so the states they declared that to be the baseline of renewable energy, and have kind of proceeded from there to try and add new generation on top of it, without doing what most states with an RPS do, which is where they buy all the renewable energy that they're counting, and they use the REC as the tracking mechanism for that. And they have different tiers and different pricing. But so New York State has these tiered programs to add renewable generation, but they kind of left all the independent RECs alone. And Hydro would sort of sell RECs to voluntary buyers, mostly customers who were a business or an enterprise was trying to offset their own carbon footprint for their own green claim purposes, disconnected from any compliance mechanism. I want to sort of describe the difference between compliance RECs and voluntary RECs. So like compliance RECs, or if you're a load server, if you're a utility or an ESCO in the state like New York, you're required to buy a certain amount of RECs from the state that the state has purchased through its procurements, or from generators that qualify for those procurements as a compliance cost for doing business in New York, regulated by the Public Service Commission. Voluntary RECs are where you're doing it for your own green claim, and you may be part of a program through LEED or ASHE or something like that requires it, but as far as the state's concerned, that's voluntary. It's not legally required. So hydro RECs were always voluntary RECs. In 2019, New York State did an interesting thing where you have energy services companies, which are sort of independent load servers. They will sell you at your house or at your business an energy product that gives you a fixed price. This is post-deregulation. We all have the ability in New York State to buy power from independent producers, not just from the utility. And for many years, that market had not really grown in the way New York State wanted it to when they created the program back in the early 2000s. And in fact, a lot of people were just paying a lot of money they didn't have to pay for an energy product that wasn't really delivering them any value. And the state, in an attempt to kind of crack down on those more predatory ESCO practices, and I've been to their marketing conferences, and a lot of them are it can be very predatory. They essentially sign you up for an energy product. They say you're going to get your power at 5 cents, and it's going to be cheaper than the utility. And then they wait for you to forget about them, and then they raise the price. And because it's right on your national grid bill or your utility bill, you don't necessarily notice. So the state was trying to crack down on this, and they said, okay, ESCOs, now if you want to sell a product that's more expensive than the utility's default product, it has to be renewable, and it has to meet our definition of renewable, which means you have to source your RECs from in New York State. So that created this sort of hybrid compliance thing, right, where like the ESCO doesn't have to sell an above market product, although from a market perspective, some of them say there's no way to avoid it. But in order to sell that, they have to buy these RECs basically from us, from independent hydro. We were the largest supplier. And that drove our REC price from like $6 a megawatt hour up to $25 a megawatt hour in a couple of years. So it created this sort of whole market for in-state hydro RECs, which hadn't existed before. But it also put us in bed with some of the worst players in the energy space, where you had these companies that for a minute were like, oh no, we're going to be driven out of New York. We're not going to be able to charge people 30 cents a kilowatt anymore for whatever we want. And then they realized, oh, we just have to buy a 2.5 cent REC, and then we can keep charging our 30 cents. So, we're always trying to sort of chase these opportunities, but also try and be sensitive to, what the state needs are, and just having basic ethics ourselves. But it's really interesting in New York City, there's like a whole other layer where there's now Local Law 97, which requires New York City building owners to make efficiency improvements, but they are allowed to offset, I think it's 30%, actually not 30% of what, I'm not sure, 30% of something of their requirements they can offset with renewable energy certificates. And the way the law was originally written, the power had to be sunk into New York City, which is important because it means they can't just buy RECs from a hydropower producer that's in northern New York in the Adirondacks where I live, unless that producer has paid to deliver the power all the way to New York City, because that's how it actually reduces the fossil generation in Zone J, where the city is. And so that was actually something that a lot of hydros were really excited about, particularly the hydro companies who also own buildings in New York City. But the more recent interpretation of that has sort of limited it back, that now what the mayor's office is saying is that the only RECs that will qualify for that are RECs that are additional to New York State, which means the generators are new and they meet the criteria of Tier 4 and offshore wind. So Tier 4 is the Champlain Hudson Power Express transmission line that's coming down into Zone J from Hydro-Quebec. So that is existing hydro, but it's from a different state. So it's new to New York State, so it qualifies. So we're basically getting boxed out of this local law 97 market as independent hydro. We refer to it as kind of a candy cane effect now, where like Hydro-Quebec is going to be sending power to New York City, and now they're buying power from Ontario to backfill, and Ontario is buying power from independent upstate New York hydro. So yeah,
It sounds efficient.
it's a bit of a mess, but yeah. And NYSERDA is now going to, it's sort of similar to what NYSERDA is doing statewide, which is that they're now going to be offering the RECs that they're buying from the new wind and solar that they're generating. They're going to be trying to sell those RECs into the voluntary market as well, which is where Hydro is currently monetizing its RECs. So we had a brief moment there, but I think we're getting boxed out a little bit again. But
What's the future hold then? What's your crystal ball?
I think that this step, the original sin, to go all the way back to the beginning, was like this idea that the state can count generation towards its mix without actually securing the RECs. And that has created all of these weird little pockets that they have to fill in different little programs. And I wish I could talk to Kevin about it, because he would be. I remember so clearly how the facial gestures he had when he was annoyed and upset policy that made no sense. But I think that the New York State selling RECs into the voluntary market is moving in a direction of a type of rationalization. Yeah, I don't know. I'm looking for a rosy outlook, or at least a coherent one.
And on the rosy outlook, are there specific locations? You talked, the overview is great. Where are these 24/7 tariffs happening?
Well, they're happening they're not 24/7 tariffs, just as what I set out, but they're similar. There's one that's been filed in Nevada by Google. It's a third-party provider. It'll be a power contract for geothermal. Mm-hmm. And what's interesting, if I had a PowerPoint, you could look at a 24-hour load line, and it's sort of peaked in the middle of the day. There's lots of solar, but in the shoulder times, there's just empty space. But what they're proposing is to bring in geothermal along the bottom that'll just push everything up toward the load line and close those shoulder gaps out. So geothermal is like the resource you sell. It's dispatchable. Google's in discussions with Duke in the Carolinas, North Carolina and South Carolina. Things sort of like this are being offered in Virginia by several utilities there. There's a community choice aggregator in San Mateo County Peninsula, and they're doing a similar thing to what Google has done. They've put out they put out a plan where they say they can be 100% 24/7 carbon-free energy provided by the end of 2025.
And do these rec tracking, like when you're getting the attributes for these, are beyond MRETs, are we seeing anybody step up to the granularity that's needed here to take an hourly product?
PJM's GATS is doing something like that. New England ISO's GIS system, it's my understanding secondhand that they want nothing to do with this. But when I was thinking about doing this panel and thinking about Joshua and Emmett, I was thinking what sort of strategies, since they're in the business. I mean, I just get to write papers, right? But they're in the business. I think what sort of strategies that one could be just sort of resist this because it's going to take a long time, or ask yourself what sort of companies would be interested in representing that they actually are being served on an hourly basis by carbon-free energy. Your product is dispatchable. And if you can find the company that's interested in getting that, you don't need MRETs necessarily. You just need to track it and contract for it and represent it in a commercial context. But what you could do is look at the resources you have, and on those peak times in the morning, in the afternoon, when companies that are already served 100% by RECs, traditional RECs, are still being served by gas on the margins there. What you can do is provide them with a resource that you're selling today in general, but you can create value for the megawatt hours you're producing between, let's say, 5 and 8 in the morning and 4 and 9 at night, and get a bigger return on those.
Yeah, it's interesting. I haven't gotten that call yet, but it certainly. But no, I just to say, like, hopefully it will come. I think because it's actually kind of interesting to describe how this market works. It's just these brokers who will call and say, I need 30,000 RECs from 2023, and I want them to be in New York, or I don't care, or I don't care if they're hydro wind. People have different needs, and sometimes they'll want back half. Sometimes they want part of the year, or not not the spring, but they want the fall,
because they last into, there's a buffer period when a REC must be retired or it's no longer useful or valid. So
yeah, and there's different requirements for different state or independently managed tracking systems. But hopefully one day some people will call and say, I want this many RECs, but they got to be from this time.
I think we're getting there. We're getting granular.
Do that. I think what you need to do is find a small municipal that might be interested in, find some progressive companies or municipal or co-ops that are interested in that. And I think you could do something with them.
So there's the power of the service provider, and then there's the power of the consumer to shape the demand and what's going to be in the market. It sounds like there's a lot of good ways that customers can call up and have a voice with their utility, similar to any kind of political activism. So there's options out there, and a lot of the utilities are more willing to shape a product than you think. So it's always worth an ask. Okay, we are almost out of time. I was going to talk about T-Rex, the dinosaur, not the dinosaur. T-Rex, a time-marked REC. Somebody called it TEACs, but that's boring. So T-Rex it is. And Advent, we had a wish list here. Somebody was inspired by a national green bank. Is anybody here inspired by a national hourly match time registry? So we get rid of the regionality, North American as a whole. No, okay, just me. It would be much easier. But anyway, any last questions? I know we're a little bit over time, so I don't want to take any of Katie's time. But give me one or two good ones if you've got them. Okay.
Why don't you take?
Yeah. Priority over here.
Minor question.
Okay.
So first, I want to say I'm from Plattsburgh, New York, and I live right by Lake Champlain. Yeah, and Las Vegas. And I was taking a walk by the lake this summer, and I saw them laying the transmission line that's going from Canada to New York City. Mm-hmm. I took a picture, showed my husband. He wasn't as excited as I was. Tried to explain what it was. I digress. But my question is kind of minor. I was a clinician this summer with the IEE, and we were talking about RECs, higher quality versus lower quality RECs got thrown into the mix. I'm curious about those labels, the differences, if they matter.
Are we talking about like unbundled versus project-based delivery recs, or are we talking about social or peace recs, or
I think
T-REC?
there's just higher quality RECs
Higher quality
was the
RECs.
word I latched onto, but perhaps
Perhaps
certified.
regional specific or CRS verified might be what is being referenced there.
honestly,
Yeah.
I've been up since 4, so I have to look at my notes. So I'm not sure.
And in the FTC green guides, you don't want recs that came from a project that's over 15 years old or like way out of the scope of North America or whatever it is. And then greenhouse gas protocol coming down also with a potential guidance on what kind of location-based or market-based products count at the advent of emissionality too. What really counts? Are we really measuring what matters? So
I
final
can
word.
answer your question, and I'm thinking of Kevin Jones, because Kevin Jones really disliked the way people did shell games with RECs. A lot of states with an RPS, Renewable Portfolio Standard, have class 1. That's new stuff, incremental, additional, however you want to describe it. $50 a megawatt hour, for that REC. Take the state of Maine. Anybody from Maine here? Okay. State of Maine, they put together an RPS, and it was just existing biomass plants. Now those things trade for about $5. What drove Kevin nuts is that the new RECs that came from the biomass plant in Burlington would sell those to Connecticut and would buy Maine RECs. So make the money selling in Connecticut, buy Maine RECs, and then the mayor would get out there and say, we source 100% renewables. Well, he does, and there's no cop on the beat to get after him. But you see the difference in value. New stuff that's been around, that's not that, the whole idea of REC development is to stimulate a market and bring stuff to market. RECs are tracking money. They're not tracking electrons, they're tracking money. Yeah.
One more here.
Yeah, my question's for Joshua. And I apologize. You said one thing very quickly and my mind stuck on it. So I had to ask. You mentioned your clients procuring wind RECs from West Texas. Wind RECs from West Texas.
Low quality record.
Can you,
Those are low quality. That's right.
do you want to talk about that?
Well, yeah. So I'll just mention, every corporate, every buyer comes to the market with different requirements, and some higher than others, right? And so, certainly if you want the higher quality RECs, no more than 15 years old, it's got to be additional. So, in fact, that's what sort of drives a lot of virtual PPAs, right? They're with projects that have not yet started construction, and the contract, the VPPA, provides the rationale for the decision to finance and move forward. Like, that's the underpinning, right? That's the lenders need to see they've got their revenue stream. But the idea is that you're moving the needle as a buyer because you're supporting the financing and construction of new renewables, right?
And maybe you have stores in the region that benefit from that new firmed up grid and the renewables that's actually going into the store load from the utility contract, which is really fun to talk about because every contract and store and utility is different. So it gets very complicated.
Yeah. But then there are also corporates who they're not looking to be the vanguard. They're just like, look, yes, these are all West Texas. There's congestion. There's all kinds of issues. Maybe it's new, but still there's issues. Yeah, exactly. But we're just trying to do something. They're trying to do what they can. So maybe they don't get 5 gold stars, but maybe they get 2. I don't know. But the idea is they're trying to get out there and drive new construction. But that's really driven by the corporate. Like, what is their sustainability goals? What are their standards? So that's kind of what drives those purchases.
My RECs are artisanal. Sourced from small, handmade, locally operated hydro facilities.
They're like Grafton cheddar. All right, guys, it's been great. Thank you. We've got to wrap it up, and I really appreciate it. Let's give our panelists a big round of applause. Thank you.